The task ahead of us is huge.
I would be remiss not to ask.
They don't believe in democracy.
Give you a B+, I think, for that. Hello and welcome to the YEPP show. I'm Eoin Scarlett, Deputy Secretary General for YEPP, and today we're going to be discussing the very important topic of defence, which is of course a very important youth issue for us and something that YEPP has been campaigning on for a long time. And we're delighted to have in the podcast today David McAllister, who is a German MEP. And David, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you, Eoin, for inviting me.
Thanks for coming. So David is, of course, a perfect person to discuss this topic because he is chair of the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee and he is a long-time advocate on defence issues. He also is a vice chair of the EPP party. And also a bit of interest, I suppose, David, is that your mother is German, your father was British. And of course, as people will know, Germany and Britain, in a way, are Europe's biggest defence actors. So I suppose I just wondered, maybe to start us off, if that's something that informs your interest in defence or how you see defence in Europe, that kind of interesting background with the two parents.
I think the three main priorities for this current legislature of the European institutions are: Europe needs to become more competitive, we need to tackle irregular migration, and we need to do much more on our own security and defence. And the task ahead of us is huge. We don't have much time, but I sincerely believe that at the end of this decade, we will need something like a European Defence Union, which is composed of major steps forward to integrated European armed forces, a solid defence industrial base in Europe, completing the defence single market, and in the end, it's about strengthening the European pillar within the established framework of NATO. Personally, I come from a military background. My father served in the British military. Was stationed in Germany. That's where I grew up. That's where my binational background comes from. And myself, I served 2 years in the German military. And security isn't everything, but without security, everything in the end is nothing. If we want to maintain the way we live in Europe, if we want to secure our liberty, our democracy, or what we cherish in Europe, we need to be able to protect ourselves against those who have very, very different plans and ideas.
Oh, and that's probably an interesting one to pick up on your last point there about it being about strengthening the European pillar within NATO as opposed to creating a new military structure. I mean, in a way that kind of frames our whole conversation, doesn't it? Is what is the future of the transatlantic relationship? I mean, if I could maybe start us off a bit there. Like, do you see the US security guarantee for Europe being over? Do you think, we could rely on the US under the current administration if, God forbid, there was an attack on a European Union or a NATO member state?
In these days and weeks and months, there's a lot of talk about the future of European security and defence. And European security defence is based on 3 pillars. The first one is, what are the European states, the member states of the EU, the European member states of NATO, what are they doing individually? And what are they doing in cooperation with 2, 3, 4, 5 other partners? And we have a lot of good examples in Europe for that. The second pillar is, what can the European Union do? This is mainly about single market, defence industry, and others. And the third pillar is NATO. NATO is the bedrock of European security. We Europeans have a huge interest in maintaining a strong transatlantic alliance. 23 out of 27 EU member states are now also in NATO. But I'm fully aware that 4 countries, including your home country, Ireland, aren't. And we will always take care of the specific interests of these 4 countries. But the huge majority is in both institutions and both organizations. And the Article 5 of NATO, I would describe it as the holy article. Article 5 says an attack on one NATO member state is considered as an attack on all NATO member states. So it's one for all for one, all for one for all. And that's why the United States are a founding member of NATO. All presidents have committed themselves to Article 5. And also at the NATO summit in The Hague, despite a lot of challenges around this summit, the US president was clear in his commitment to NATO and also Article 5. And the commitment to Article 5 needs to be rock solid. It needs to be 100% crystal clear, because if there's only the slightest doubt that Article 5 wouldn't apply, that would mean very bad news for NATO and for certain individual member states.
And just to come in on that one, because, and I should say as well that I'm very much speaking here as a European rather than an Irish person when it comes to defence. And YFG, Young Fine Gael, is actually the only political organisation in the whole of Ireland that openly supports NATO membership. So we'd like to not be one of those 4, frankly. But I suppose the issue people are raising more and more now is that while it's true that, you know, an attack on one is attack on all in the NATO charter, it doesn't necessarily specify that the support has to be direct frontline combat forces. So is a path forward that sometimes you hear certain Trump administration officials hinting at, where the US more plays a role as the strategic enablers, the kind of the combat support, the support forces, as opposed to direct, and Europe takes the lead with the direct forces. Is that viable, or does it always have to be that if there was an attack on a European NATO member state, American direct troops, they couldn't just play a supporting role, they'd have to be there on the front lines?
I wouldn't even discuss these kind of issues in public.
Okay.
For a very good reason, because any kind of debate, any kind of discussion will be very carefully observed, for instance, in Russia. Article 5 means don't even think a single minute about attacking one of our member states. Don't even think about occupying, annexing a single square inch of our member states. It reminds me a bit of my childhood in West Berlin. That was the last posting of my father when he still served in the British military. In West Berlin, in the 70s and the 80s, until the fall of the war, we had an Allied military presence, United States, Great Britain, and France. And the message to the Soviet Union and to the communist allies of the Warsaw Pact was, don't even think a single minute about trying to get West Berlin, because you will be in deep trouble with not only free military powers, but with free nuclear powers. And that was the security guarantee for West Berlin. And I think everyone who, like myself, grew up in West Berlin knows what it means to have these security guarantees. And that's why, and I'm speaking now as a German, like we Germans benefited of Allied solidarity in West Berlin, for example.
Yeah.
I'm now very proud that Germany is one of the lead nations showing military presence in Lithuania. The German military is going to establish an entire armored brigade to also show our solidarity with our Baltic partners, in this case Lithuania. And we need to be very aware that the biggest challenge for us in Europe, the biggest threat, is the Russian Federation, and we should take all reports very seriously that the Russian Federation under Mr. Putin could be in a position to attack one of our European member states by the end of this decade. It doesn't mean that they will, but the intelligence reports say they will be able to do so.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to deter, and we have to be very crystal clear in our commitment. One thing is clear. We know exactly that we will have to step up our own European security and defense, but we are dependent on so many US support as possible, especially the strategic enablers and other things you mentioned. And that's why I would always argue that we should continue to have a strong military presence of our American partners and allies in Europe.
Okay. And one thing, though, in terms of the Russian threat, that there seems to be a little bit of a slight disagreement between some of the military experts and commentators, is that some people seem to be suggesting that the bigger threat period is actually the next 1 to 3 years that Russia sees while the Trump administration is still in charge, and while the Russian ground forces might be very worn down, their naval and their air forces are pretty intact, and whether they might think that that is the golden opportunity while Europe is still in the early stages of rearming and the US is a little bit more of a shaky ally potentially under Trump, that's actually the bigger period of danger than the 5 to 10 years after they've reconstituted their ground forces. What's your own take on that? Do you think it's one of those two, or?
All the more than 30 NATO partners are in this together, and Article 5 has been evoked once in the history of NATO, and that was after 9/11. And it was the NATO member state, the United States, who triggered Article 5. And European allies and partners showed remarkable solidarity and support. That's why, just like we in 2001 were ready to support the United States, we expect exactly the same thing in case, and we pray to God that this will not happen, that the Americans are then with us, and I'm very sure they will be. There has been a very clear commitment. The Russian Federation is, short and midterm, by far our biggest security threat in Europe. Russia is following, under President Putin, an imperialist agenda. Mr. Putin wants to bring back all the territories which used to be the former Soviet Union under, I would say, Russian influence, Russian control. And if you look at a map of 1991, 1992, that means that this is very bad news. This is a serious threat for former Soviet Union republics who are now independent. Moldova, the free countries in the Caucasus, Central Asia, and especially our free EU and NATO partners and allies, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. We have no time to lose at all. Every day, every week counts. And that's why, and that is why we are so committed as European People's Party in this matter. We need to get serious. We need to get serious urgently. Already the illegal annexation of Crimea should have been a real wake-up call. There have been so many wake-up calls over the last years and decades, but it actually had to have a fully fledged military invasion of an independent country, Ukraine, in February 2022, when Europeans started to realize President Putin is following an extremely dangerous and also evil agenda. And I have absolutely no problems at all, quite to the contrary, in naming what Mr. Putin is. He is a dictator following a revanchist agenda, and he is a war criminal. Speaking in the words of Chancellor Friedrich Merz of Germany, probably the biggest war criminal in Europe since 1945.
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree with that. What you said more. I mean, I suppose what I'm trying to get at, in a sense, David, is something that we often battle with, both in YEPP and, YEPP was one of the organisations banging the door for this for a long time. We were calling for Europe to step up on defence. I mean, I remember when we were in Rome, we had a council meeting in February 2022, 9 days before the invasion, and our Norwegian colleagues brought forward a resolution calling for heavy artillery and shells and other missiles and other Taurus missiles, which I see the German government is finally sending, to be sent to Ukraine immediately at that stage before the invasion. And we had a massive argument with some colleagues from Younger Union and from our Austrian sister party about this. And I think we were proven right after that. But the argument now that we're battling with, everyone accepts we need to send that support now. But the argument we battle with now is people who say, oh, well, Russia couldn't conquer Ukraine even, and they've lost, 1 million, according to UK Defence Intelligence, 1 million casualties, injured, wounded, captured, killed. Therefore, how on earth are they going to be able to attack and defeat NATO? And people, there's a cohort of people who think the threat level has actually gone down because Russia has lost so much equipment and manpower in Ukraine, and therefore the threat is reduced somehow. It's an argument YEPP always rails against, but what do you encounter that argument, and what's your answer to it?
YEPP rails against this with very good arguments. A few facts and figures. The Russian war of aggression against Ukraine is not simply the war of the Russian Federation against the second largest size-wise country in Europe. It's a fundamental attack on the European peace and security architecture, on the global peace and security architecture. I mean, we haven't seen this since 1945 in Europe, that one country invades another country with the aim to annex territories and to bring it in general under its control. I mean, this is what we saw in Europe in the 19th and the 20th century. We in Europe, together with our Western partners, we believe in the international rules-based order, and we believe in maintaining international law. And this is very important for small and medium-sized countries, because if the bullies get their say, that's something which huge countries can live with, but it's very bad news for all other countries. And in Europe, we are all small or medium-sized countries. That's why our support for Ukraine is much more than just supporting the brave Ukrainian women and men who are defending their own territorial integrity and their liberty. There's so much at stake. That's why I would argue we need to continue to support Ukraine, not only as long as it takes, but whatever it takes to bring Ukraine into a position that they can actually negotiate if Mr. Putin is ready to negotiate. That I would always question, and then find a just and sustainable solution how we can get back to peace in Ukraine. But we also need to continue to put the maximum political pressure on Russia. We have now adopted 18 sanctions packages as European Union. We are preparing the 19th sanctions package. I think it should be adopted sooner than later. We discussed this last week at the Foreign Ministers' Council in Copenhagen, and we need to identify further measures where we can sanction the Russian war machine, but also how we can close loopholes and how we can better implement the existing sanctions. The Russian Federation has turned into a war-driven economy. And if you look at the military production, how much ammunition, how much artillery equipment, how much battle tanks, you name it, how many drones the Russian armed forces already have and are further producing, that shows you that we have to be very, very, very cautious in believing that just because the Russians are not so successful on the war, on the battlefields of Ukraine, that they are now weakened. And Mr. Putin is just such a disgusting, cynical person. He doesn't give a damn about the young Russian soldiers who are being slaughtered on the battlefields of Ukraine. And by the way, this cynical dictator is now also allowing young North Korean soldiers also to lose their lives on the battlefield. So I can only once again express my admiration and respect for the brave Ukrainian women and men who are defending much more than just their own territorial integrity and liberty.
The German government, if I could ask you about the Merz government's plan regarding defence, it's very ambitious. It's a lot of money. Do you think it's achievable in the kind of timelines the government's laying out? Do you think it's achievable, and like, will the Bundeswehr be able to match the funding with capabilities? With having recruiting enough personnel, for example, has been a big challenge. Do you think Germany can achieve it in that kind of timeline?
Well, I welcome very much these very ambitious targets the new German government has formulated. As somebody who served himself in the German armed forces, I was disappointed to see in the last years how our armed forces, the Bundeswehr, were underfunded, and this was overdue. It's a very ambitious plan the government of Friedrich Merz has presented, but it's not only Germany. Other countries have also presented very ambitious plans. Let's talk about Poland with Prime Minister Donald Tusk. All NATO allies, that means all European NATO allies, have committed to raising their defense spending from now 2%, which is a minimum, to 3.5%, plus 1.5% for infrastructure. And this will be, of course, an enormous challenge for all of us. This means really heavy additional spending on defense. But it's not only about spending, it's not only about the money. We need to be aware, first of all, that we need the additional soldiers. We need qualified personnel in our militaries. But to get a better bang for the buck, to get more, it's logical that we should more closely cooperate as Europeans. And that's why I strongly believe in making concrete steps forward that we, in Europe together, develop military equipment, purchase military equipment, create a solid European defense industrial basis. This is a precondition for actually becoming a more sovereign actor and also getting a better position within the NATO framework. Look, in the moment, 64% of NATO spending is covered by one member state, the United States, and 36% by all others. This is not sustainable. This is not fair. And I fully understand that for many, many years, and this already started under President Bush Jr., followed then by President Obama and President Trump, that the US have always said we need to have a fairer burden sharing within the transatlantic alliance. That's where we are. A final point. What I'm seeing in the recent weeks and months is that all national governments and parliaments are now very much focused on the additional money they're going to have and how they're going to spend this at a national level. But I think we need to have a bigger picture. What we need is more joint European projects. So when it comes to air and missile defense, artillery, drones, or just think of the important sphere of cybersecurity, this is where I think we need to really think bigger, and we need to move forward concrete European projects that step by step we can actually achieve the European Defence Union. So many of us, including YEPP, have been talking and discussing about for ages. And now I think the time has really come in the next 5 years up to 2030 to make this a reality.
Okay. And I'll just push on one last question, which I think I would be remiss not to ask. I think it's one of the biggest battles that we as potential young future European politicians are going to have to win the argument with the public and with opposition parties, especially from more left parties, is how are we going to pay for it, basically? And are we going to have to rein in welfare? Are we going to have to rein in health? Are we going to have to change the way we think about pensions and the dependency ratio? I know it's a very big topic to be throwing at you, but like, what would be your response to that? What's the main way you see forward of paying for this defence increase?
Having served in politics now for nearly 25 years, I can say that politics in the end is always about setting the right priorities. And of course, also, it's always about financial priorities, because you will only have a limited amount of money available in the budget, and then you have to make sure how this money is distributed. Democracy, the rule of law, our individual freedoms, the freedom of speech, media freedom, cultural tolerance, religious tolerance, equality of women and men, and so many other things which make up the European way of life, is nothing to be taken for granted. We enjoy all these liberties in Europe. That's why Europe is such an attractive continent for so many people in the world, that we are so happy to be Europeans and to live in Europe. But all this comes at a price, and the price is security. And that's why any investment in defense and security is well invested taxpayers' money. I wish, like millions of other Europeans, the world was another one. I wish we would have a peaceful, constructive neighbor of the Russian Federation. Unfortunately, we don't. The Russian Federation, under dictator and war criminal Putin, is following a very different agenda than we are. And Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, as different they might be when it comes to the details, what they have in common is that they want to reshape the existing international order. They don't want to play a rules-based fair game. They believe in a world where there are spheres of influence, like we had in the old days. These autocratic regimes don't believe in the Western way of living. They don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in individual liberties. And that's why we need to react. And that's why my argument will always be, from the left to the center to the right in European politics, we need to find a consensus that defending our countries and defending our community of countries in the EU and NATO, that is something which should not be questioned. And that's why I hope that we will find cross-party support. Look, I don't want to repeat myself, but the challenges ahead are enormous. And look, I was at the age of YEPP members when the wall came down in 1989. I was 18, 19, and we thought this is the end of history. And from now on, we in Europe will all be friends and partners. My home country, Germany, for the first time in its history, will be surrounded by member states, neighboring states, and we all just want the same, to live peacefully together and have a good time. We should have been warned at an earlier stage that the Russian Federation under Mr. Putin went in a totally wrong direction. I think the first wake-up call should have been the war against Georgia, because Georgia, a European country, 20% of its territory occupied since the Russian-Georgian War, Abkhazia, Ossetia. We have the Transnistria case in Moldova. You have so many examples where you could see that Mr. Putin, step by step, was following his imperialist agenda, re-establishing the Soviet Union. And here we are now, and that's why we now have to take these very, very difficult decisions. It will be a heavy burden, but it's for a good case. But a final point, I strongly believe that one day we will see another Russia, a better Russia. Russia remains a European nation, and Russia has provided so much culture and other such positive impacts on our way of life and our way of thinking and living in Europe. It's just in the moment, as long as this dictator is sitting in the Kremlin or one of his scholars, we will have to have a very tough stance on the Russian Federation.
Well, look, thank you, David. I know we're running out of time, but I think you've given us a lot of food for thought and a reminder on not just how we're going to rearm and reform European defence, but why, which is always the big question in politics, I think, isn't it? So one last final segment.
What's coming now?
This is the surprise segment, which is what we call the Hell Yep test, which we do with all our guests, where we fire a couple of quick policies at you that are YEPP policies, and it's meant to be a quick fire round.
Okay.
And you say yes or no whether you support them or not, and I then press this buzzer if you disagree with one of the policies. Do you support having a lower income tax rate for people aged 18 to 35?
Probably YEPP is in favour, so I'll say yes.
Great, there we go. Fast first one. Do you support qualified majority voting on foreign and security policy at the Council? A slightly more left field one. Do you support lifting the ban on tobacco snus in the European Union?
Lifting the ban?
Currently only Sweden is the only country where tobacco snus is legal.
I don't know. I'd probably say no. You're in favour?
I'm afraid that is
you want snooze for all?
We do.
Okay.
We're anti-nanny state. Do you support suspending Hungary's voting rights at the European Council?
No.
I'm afraid that was passed after a lengthy debate.
I understand the position, but it's very, very difficult, and you have to go through the entire consequences, what that would mean. That would more or less mean the end of Hungarian EU membership. I don't want to go too much into the details. Hungary is an important EU partner, but I am not happy at all with the way the government in Hungary is performing, and I hope that they will soon be replaced.
Well, that's it. We might need a whole other podcast to discuss that topic. So, and last but not least, relevant to our discussion today, do you support an independent European nuclear deterrent?
In theory, this sounds feasible. Practically, that is something very, very complicated. I believe in a nuclear deterrent for Europe. Best would be to continue the good cooperation with the United States. But we have two nuclear powers in Europe, nuclear armed powers, Britain and France, and together with them, the European member states who don't have nuclear deterrent need to come up with strategies how we can have an additional nuclear deterrent to the one already existing by the US.
Maybe well, I think we give you a B+, I think, for that.
No, but I mean, it's good. Look, is fully entitled to have some own positions, and you can be very more clearly unprincipled. It's just a lot of these issues are, in practically terms, very difficult to actually implement.
Yeah. Well, that's what we like, throwing a few curveballs. But
sure, I think I was perhaps the same 35 years ago.
Yes, I'm sure. Well, look, thank you very much, David, for joining us and for giving us your time. And we'll see you on the next edition of The YEPP Show.
You've been listening to The YEPP Show. Thank you for joining us today. And make sure to follow us on our social media.